Good afternoon and welcome to Rubbing Minds. My name is Isabella Adediji. Now we're right in the festive season and we can see a lot of merriment in the air. People are beginning to troop out. We're seeing end of year parties and a lot of noise being made about going to the cinema, blockbuster movies. And we're going to be looking at that during the show. But we're going to start off today's conversation looking at something that has seen an increase in recent times. We've seen social media, the traditional media, replete with news of defamation cases, and we see the police getting involved. And some people online are wondering, where do we draw the line between free speech, freedom of speech, of expression, and defamation? And how far is too far? Should it lead to arrests? Should the police be involved? Or is this strictly a civil issue? Now, joining us to discuss defamation cases and the role of the Nigerian police, we're joined in the studio by an attorney and social commentator in the person of Peter Cole Onele. Welcome to Rubbing Minds.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me, Isabella. It's a pleasure to be here today.
Let's thank you for honoring our invitation, and let's get right into the conversation. In layman's terms, what is defamation and how is it different from, say, libel, which we see a lot in the news?
Well, thank you so much. That's a very important question. First, because, I mean, as you mentioned, this is a topic that's been publicly discussed on several platforms, primarily the online platform, currently as we speak. And there's been a lot of opinions and counter opinions and people expressing their views on this. But just to break it down properly, from a legal point of view, when we speak of defamation, what we speak of primarily is simply the publication of a statement or statement, as it were, by an individual who, knowing that those statements are actually false, goes ahead to publish them with the intent or the intention to damage the reputation of that other person whose those statements are made against. And that publication is very important. Now, just to clarify that.
So how does it differ from slander or from a libel?
Well, yeah, the clarity is that defamation itself is the principal offense, however, or the principal, as it were, the norm itself. But the derivative of defamation are slander and libel, where it is oral, meaning that it is not in actual written form, or it is not published in writing. It is said to be slander. So if I was to say something here at this point in time on air, it could be termed as slander. Whereas if it was, say I wrote a book about it, or went on air to actually did write it down, that would be libel. So libel is defamation in written form, while slander is defamation in oral form as well.
And you know, you spoke about the intent. So it's about the intent to cause harm or to malign someone's reputation. Now, what if someone just makes a false statement out of ignorance? Can that be argued as defamation?
Well, I think that question is important. First, to clarify that, as we all know, well, when we speak of ignorance, ignorance of the law is not actually an excuse, right, as a way. So the issue of defamation is very important because, as I said, publication is vital. So what was said must have been said with an intent to injure. First, it must be false. The statement that was made must be false. So where the statement that was made is not proven to be false, it does not constitute defamation. And that's why one of the primary and principal defenses defamation is truth. So if you're able to prove that, what the other person believes to have been defaming in actual fact or defamatory was true, then in that sense, that would not amount or account to defamation. However, generally speaking, as I mentioned, in terms of publication, for instance, if a book was written, the usual requirement for defamation to be proven is that there was a third party who had heard those words being said. Using this example, for instance, if there was a third party who heard me say those words, that's enough to justify and to prove that those words, if they were insulting, if they were meant to disparage the third party, and if they were false, that's the fundamental part of it, then they were in fact defamatory.
The falsehood.
Yes.
Okay. We're also joined via Zoom by a policy consultant, Timi Olagunju, who's also a lawyer. So, Timi, welcome to Rubbing Minds.
Thank you for having me. Good to see you again, and Peter as well.
Yeah. So let's go into get right into the conversation. When someone gets defamed, what's the first step to take? If they say, look, I've been defamed, there's a falsehood about me that has been published, should they start calling you as a lawyer? Should they go to the police? Should they go on social media? What should they do?
So first approach is, in cases of defamation, there are two approaches. First is civil or criminal, right? And what is defined as criminal is dependent on what the law says is criminal. So in that context, if the law of a particular state, for example, in the context of Lagos State, defamation, whether libel or slander, that's verbal or written, that defamation, as Peter has rightly stated, does not constitute a criminal case. You cannot carry on a criminal case in Lagos. And so, for example, other states in that context, for example, maybe Ekiti State and a few other states might still consider defamation as a criminal case based on, certain provisions of the law, one of which is the criminal code.
So I will try to reconnect again with Timmy. Must be the connection. So I'll move to you, Peter, and I'll let you also build on what he has said. So it now has to do with the states to determine whether you get the police involved or you get your lawyer involved. But for that person who has been defamed, what rights do they have?
Well, I think a good starting point would be to just refer to what Barrister Timi Olagunju said earlier, which is the fact that for a distinction to be made between criminal defamation and civil defamation, again, there's a very clear difference between what constitutes criminal defamation and civil defamation. Now, to build a bit of a background, my viewpoint now, this is my viewpoint, and this is a viewpoint that is supported by legal jurists across different schools of thought, which is the fact that criminalization of defamation in itself is antithetical to a democratic society. Now, the criminalization of defamation has been used as a tool, as an oppressive tool, to clamp down on free speech and also primarily on the freedom of journalists, of social critics to be able to say and speak against evils perceived in the society. So you oftentimes see that being weaponized as a tool against the individual. But just to get into the nitty-gritty.
But if you say that it's based on falsehood,
yes. If
the person who quote and unquote makes the defamatory statement can prove that this isn't false, that this is based on evidence, then can that person still be threatened or be threatened with the fact that they might go to jail or prison time or getting the police involved?
Well, that's where the line has to be drawn, again, like Barrister Timi mentioned. Primarily, when the issue is decriminalization of defamation, then it is a subject matter of the law as it is. And the law as it is a subject matter of, is it enacted in the laws of the state or in the laws of the federation? As far as I know, to my knowledge, legally speaking today, the concept of criminal defamation is a federal offense as well. It is an offense that is traceable to the provisions of the Criminal Code Act. As an act, it's an act of the National Assembly.
So which supersedes? If you have a state like Ekiti, for example, that's criminal, and you have a state like Lagos where it's civil, does the state come first or the federal comes first?
Well, let me just clarify, for all intents and purposes, that I am not aware of a provision in the Criminal Code of Ekiti State today, which is the Criminal Code law of Ekiti State in itself, that criminalizes defamation per se. In fact, just to draw a quick reference to the very popular scenario that everyone's familiar with, the case of Dele Farotimi and his eventual arraignment before a magistrate court. Of course, mentioning that this matter is sub judice, which means that it's before a court of law, so I would not be going into the merit of the case or otherwise. But just for purposes of enlightenment, it should be noted that as far as the law is concerned, the issue of defamation criminally in Nigeria today is principally a derivative of the Criminal Code Act, which is a federal legislation. So, as aware, that offense can only be prosecuted successfully by the Attorney General of the Federation or somebody who is acting from an order or a permission from that office. As of today, I am not aware if that is the case in Ekiti State, and we've seen that play out as well. So, but just bringing this down into the context of that same scenario, one would believe, I would like to just quote and refer to a very popular reference that one of the very most respected legal personalities in Nigeria today, Rafa Babalola himself, had written in 2018 about the issue of the criminalization of defamation. And he said in that particular piece, which is published on Babalola University's website, that personal squabbles between individuals need not become a subject matter for the court or for the police to wade into. Now, in that same article, he laid down certain principles which he believed to be the test for when defamation should be criminalized. However, notwithstanding these principles that have been laid down, the reality is that if, as an individual, there is a reasonable proposition as regards the character of the person being damaged, I would think that a remedial approach as opposed to a punitive approach would be the most suitable one. Knowing that for criminal matters, punitive measures are primarily, but civil actions allowed and they give rise to remedies.
Okay.
Yeah, and additionally...
Okay, we have Timmy back on Zoom, and I would like Timmy to weigh in to where the police should get involved. To just piggyback off what Peter Cole has been speaking about on where do we start to draw the line when we're criminalizing it or it remains civil? And should there be redress sought outside of the courts, maybe come to some kind of amicable agreement that it doesn't even get to the courts, let alone get the police involved?
Well, interestingly, Barrister Peter has laid a very interesting foundation on the subject matter. I just want to quickly refer to Section 39 of the Ekiti law, criminal law, which specifically talks about some measure of publication of false news or statement, and that it must be such that it is likely to incite fear, alarm, or harm in public peace. And so Section 39 of the criminal law in Ekiti State states that, but it puts certain exception to it, that it must be such as incite fear, alarm, or harm public peace. That being said, when you look at the issue of defamation as a whole, and in exception of defamation of based on electronic publications under the Cyber Crimes Act, or defamation of federal institutions or officials, defamation as it's on its own is not under the exclusive or concurrent list. It is a residual matter. And so you should expect that this kind of case would have come basically under Section 39 of the Ekiti law, rather than the criminal code, which is a law that was passed in 1916, pre-independence. That being said, it's important to also contextualize the arrests in that sense. So, for example, when an arrest is to be made for a warrant that was issued by a court in Ekiti, it is expected under the Criminal Justice Act, which is applicable in Ekiti State, although not in Lagos, that the police officers in charge, subsection 1, section 46, subsection 1, states that the police officers in charge must, at the place, the state they want to issue the warrant, officially inform the police in that particular state as to the fact that they want to do that. Then secondly, they must bring the matter. For example, in the case of Dele and Afe Babalola, you'd see that Dele's office was in Lekki Phase 1, which meant that by that law, they should have brought the case within the jurisdiction or division of the court there to be able to get the go-ahead. And the reason why the court specifies that is that so that they can ensure that the person being arrested is the same person that is on the warrant in the other states. so that you don't have a case of mistaken identity or whisking out somebody who is not supposed to be arrested. Then subsection 3 of that same act allows for that same court to decide whether to grant the person bail and inform the court in Ekiti that, look, we've granted this person bail, but the case can proceed. And so if you ask the key question, was the police in Lagos State informed about any of such arrests? Is there any official document to that effect? Right? Because he was arrested on the 3rd and whisked away to Ekiti and arraigned on the 4th. So it seems that the evidence, which evidence is the end of argument, goes to the effect that certain procedural breaches have happened in terms of the arrest of Mr. Dele Farotimi in that sense. So it's important that we look at that in that sense. Very important, because if the foundation be destroyed, what can the makeup artists do than build, than put powder? Rather than have a powdered case that seems like a persecution rather than a prosecution, right?
Okay.
The foundation of the procedure in which the arrest was initiated is in itself faulty under the law. And that's
you spoke about some procedural breaches. I'll move to you, Peter Cole. And what we're beginning to see become very rampant is where these things happen and the police gets involved and we don't know what is happening to these people, and there's almost that fear and intimidation that if you say something wrong, you publish something wrong, whether it's based on falsehood or your personal opinion, like you just clarified in one of your answers, there's that possibility that you could end up in jail and you end up in front of a magistrate court. And what does that say about our democratic processes? What does it say about our freedoms to expression and free speech?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think I spoke to that previously. I'll just restate again that when we speak of the very essence of democracy, what is fundamental to a democratic system is the respect and the enforcement of the fundamental human rights of the members of the public. And at all times, it is sacrosanct and it is fundamental for the freedom of speech and the freedom of expression of members of the public to be highly respected. Now, at all times, the line becomes blurred when the issue of defamation comes into play. And that's why I think it's important that we should also remember that at all times, any party who believes that there has been a case of defamation against them has the right to ventilate these issues before a civil court. Now, I had earlier alluded to the issue of the nature of civil actions to be remedial in nature as opposed to criminal actions which are typically punitive. What it means is that if, for instance, a party was to pursue a civil remedy for the issue of defamation, then that party would have the right to be able to approach the court to, for instance, seek relief such as a retraction, an apology, or certain compensatory damages, which I believe to a very large extent. Contextualizing this, if you should allow me, contextualizing this, because this matter, for instance, is one between a legal colossus, as it were, in the Nigerian legal space today, Ààrẹ Afẹ́ Babalola,
and also in the renowned...
Yeah, no problem.
And I would just like to get Timmy very briefly, and this has to do with the involvement of the police, because what we're now seeing is that the police get involved, they detain people, the manner in which it is done. It's almost like the police are now running some sort of boarding house where they're just keeping people in against their will. What do you have to say in a minute or less?
Well, the truth about it is that, yes, the police needs to do better in terms of procedural following procedures. And this is important for justice, not just to be done, but to be seen to be done. However, not all police officers are bad. For example, the same case that was brought in Ekiti was also brought by Tony Elumelu before the police in Lagos State. And they invited Mr. Dele for question in that sense. And the matter was never a public issue at all. And so I think that there are certain elements in the police that give a bad name to the police. And it's important for the IG to step in this sense, particularly even the issue of brandishing guns in public. I think any IG that can ensure that guns are not brandished in public like a militarized era will do well. And I call on the president to do something about this matter in that sense, because it's a national issue.
Thank you very much, Timi Olagunju, a lawyer and policy consultant, and also to our guest in the studio here, Peter Cole Onele, attorney and social commentator, for your contributions on this very important topic.